All right. So that's part one. We covered a lot of verses, okay? But hopefully we're starting to see and paint a picture. I know I'm very strong with you guys. You know what? Let the shock value be there. Stop being offended. If it's not you, then don't worry about it. I've sat in sermons where I know it was me, but I said it's not me. But I've also sat in sermons where I know it wasn't me, and I didn't get bothered by it. I just realized that particular thing didn't apply to me. And if it really doesn't, then don't own it and get all offended about it. Somebody needed to hear that, because somebody still had their thumb in their mouth and their ears all clogged up, and they needed their diaper changed. Somebody did. And all of you probably do at some point in different ways. We all do. There's so many parts where we still need to just grow up. So, don't let the words and how they're delivered bother you. He's very strong. And he smacks them around hard all the time. You guys are still thinking like Christians from the New Testament where it's all just peace and love and wonderful and this and that and whatever. Although I read the New Testament, there's a lot of stuff that isn't exactly that way. Okay, and not all the writers, including everybody's hero Paul, is very nice about everything, as Paul smashes them pretty good, saying how they're doing things that's not even heard amongst the Gentiles, and how dare you idiot, you foolish Galatians do this and that and whatever. There's some strength in there. Yeshua, that was the Pharisees he was calling hypocrites and this and that. Listen, when you act like one of them, then he's talking to you too. We have to be careful with all this. All right. So what we're going to do now is what we call the afterburn. So if you're online, start typing in your questions, and we've got our Shamish team back there that will kind of take note of it. You got Rob and Gary and Kurt, I'm sure, so all on there. And then we'll have some people here, and we'll try to split up the time as best we can. So we'll start off with you, Michael.
I felt compelled to say this today, that in Hosea there's references to Israel being married to Yahweh as his bride, same with Revelation. And I know it came up in Zone 3, Proverbs 31, and I've read it every single week since I've started keeping Shabbat as part of the Erev Shabbat thing that we do. And it finally occurred to me last week during the Zone 3 that, yes, that could be talking about a man's wife, but it could also be talking about the bride of Yahweh, that Yisrael should be treating her husband the same way. Yahweh should be treated the same way that Proverbs 31 tells us to. So I look at this now as kind of like the ketubah for our marriage. The ketubah, how do you pronounce that? Ketubah. So it's the ketubah for our marriage. And it perfectly, it functions the same way too, because it tells us what he's going to do and what we're supposed to do and what the consequence is if we don't. Hallelujah.
Amen. Look, I think that Christianity has done so much harm in terms of the mentality of this, or the approach, and not understanding that it's not believing, like as the idea of like I believe in something, but it's the being because I believe. Okay, so he wants you to be set apart, not believe in set apartness, not believe he's set apart, but be, which is an action. It's an active thing. It's a state of being. He wants you to be set apart. He says, I want you to be set apart as I am set apart. We are to be this. And so, whereas all the world is being taught all the time out of the mainstream about believing in the Creator, believing in the Son, that they exist. And that there's things that they did that help and benefit us, but there really is not any instruction for you to do anything. Stop doing anything or any of that stuff. I know I'm over, broad stroking this, but generally that's pretty much it. And so you need to know that this is about becoming a set apart person so that you are part of the people becoming a set apart people, a set apart nation. It's a state of being. And so how does that look? Well, we're learning about that in this teaching now. And it means that we become like him because he is the ultimate idea of being set apart. And so we are to become that. All right, Ashley.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
I want to be very clear about this because right as I was getting into the walk when my dad was still alive, he was calling me, so you're set apart, you're different, you're so different than everyone else. Can set apart mean a bad thing, or is it only Good.
Well, yeah, I did. I explained that when I said Christianity did that when they wanted to separate themselves from the Jewish believers.
Oh, you might have
Okay?
said- okay.
So, but the idea of the Hebrew, where it's talking about Kodesh, now it's talking about being holy or set apart in a way that has to do with Yahweh. Other people separate themselves by all kinds of other ways. We see people do it in terms of economic ways. Some places have this tiered system based on economic status, or by bloodline status. You know, there's the royal blood versus this and that over history, or by race and color of skin, or by ethnicity or where you came from. There's lots of different ways that people have used the idea of being different and set apart. All right? Look at what, in this country, what you see the Mennonites and the Amish do. They look very different, they act very different, so people know they're different. So that could be good, it could be bad. In this case, the Hebrew is telling us that to be set apart in this context means to be in a Yahweh-focused, Yahweh-useful way. In other words, set apart to be used and serving the purposes of Yahweh. So in this context, it's only good.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Look, politically, people set themselves apart. I mean, they use all kinds of ways to use things to make you look like I'm different than you for some reason. But we want ours to be a way that others will be eventually attracted to, saying that they're set apart and they're benefiting in a way that I want to understand what they're doing that's different and why they're benefiting in a way that I'm not. Okay, Janet?
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. So I really appreciate your teaching very much, because it's with guys, when you talk about tzitzit, it's so visible. And you were talking about how some Jews, you can just see by the way they're dressed that they're different. So for women, I mean, obviously our works are important, but I guess where I need to focus more is on the fruits, because you always say, you know, like if we follow and obey, believe obedience is not just doing the works, but doing it with the fruits of the Spirit, right?
Yes.
So that speaks louder than I think. I mean, I could be going to Shabbat, but if I'm coming with a really gloomy or whatever arrogant spirit, then that's not going to be what He wants me to do, right?
All right, so like for example, you would definitely be looked at as different to have joy in a trial. You would definitely be looked at as different to love an enemy. You'd definitely be looked at as different to have, you know, patience when all chaos is breaking out around you. Okay, you'll definitely look as different when you have no fear when everybody else around you is freaking out and afraid. See, so these are all part of that also being set apart, and that's where it connects to the Ruach, the fruit of the Spirit, right? So good.
Awesome. But Rabbi, I do have a question about Revelations. And you don't have to, obviously you will answer if you want to, but so when you were saying Yahweh is, and then you were saying Yeshua was, is, and is coming. So Yeshua was created by Yahweh, or
well,
they
it
were
simply
all?
says that he's
Okay.
like the only brought forth from the Father. Okay, we don't know how he came into existence or how that all works, because remember, in the beginning they were together. So we don't really know. He is referred to as in likeness to a brought forth of the Father. He's referred to as the Son, even though there's not the same physical relationships that produce children like we do. But the relationship between father and son, I can't really, you know, that's way above and beyond what we can answer, you know, because remember, they always existed as far as we're concerned. So what does that mean? I don't know. I will tell you that coming up in future parts, I do have more Revelation references. So, just so you know. Okay, Steve?
Okay. You said when you were talking that He speaks and we do, so can you tell us, in this being set apart, how much of it do we get to decide what is and what is not set apart, or how it is said, or how it is determined? What is our input on that?
Okay, so that's a good question. Look, we don't decide what's right and wrong. We decide, or at least we try to have discernment as to whether or not whatever's going on around us or the choices we have, how that would fit into a halachic or Torah walk situation, and then walk out the correct choice. Now, of course, if you don't know, that's where you should get counsel, right? You have a situation come up, and sometimes it's pretty obvious as you understand Torah, Okay, so you're at a restaurant, you're getting breakfast, and they offer you bacon and sausage. And so you should know that you shouldn't be eating it if it's pork, right? So you might ask, well, what is it? What is it made of? And they say, well, it's pork. And you say, okay, so then I'm not going to do that. Now, what if you're in a situation that's not as simple as that, where you don't know the right answer as far as being set apart? Well, then you call or make an appointment or contact the leadership in some way to ask, hey, I'm not really sure which is the set apart response I should have to be set apart in this situation. And that's where we get counsel. All right, and plus a lot of it's covered in the teaching. So, for a lot of you, I hate to say it this way, and I don't think any other teacher that I can think of quite has to phrase what I'm about to phrase, because you need everything I've taught. Okay, I don't know that any other teacher could say that. I'm not saying that makes me better or different. It's just different. Okay, because a lot of them do things that are interesting and good, and they may be useful to someone. You need everything I've taught you. Okay? And so if you haven't heard it all, then you need to make a plan to listen to all of it, because you need it. Okay? It is critical to every one of the questions you're asking is covered to some degree in those teachings. And your lexicon will get reset to where it needs to be. So I'm just want to encourage you, if you're new, well, because people call up and they'll say, I'm new, I've listened to a couple of your teachings. That's fine. But you are going to need to listen to all of them. But there's 600 plus. Look, I've got 2,200 videos on YouTube. That's intimidating. Well, a lot of them are parts from other teachings. I think teaching-wise, there's only 600 or 700 of them. And they think, well, that's 600. Well, you need them, though. And some of you think, well, I don't have time for that. Well, what are you wasting your time on doing then? What else? I don't understand what you're doing that's taking up all your time. Okay? You should be listening to them every day. And if you haven't learned and heard all of these things yet, you're missing things. You are missing halakhic things and understandings you need to do this. Oh, that's so prideful and arrogant of you. Well, think what you want. I'm just telling you what I believe, okay? All right? You need the information that he's given through me to you. And so you need to go back and listen to that stuff. All right, Chris?
Okay, so you went over chapter 19 of Leviticus, where it says to be set apart for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am set apart.
Yep.
And so is that the same idea as in chapter 20, where in verse 7, where it says, and you shall set yourselves apart, and shall be set apart, for I am Yahweh, your Elohim. I am Yahweh who sets you apart. Is that the same idea of being, like in a state of being of set apart versus actually like the action of setting yourselves apart?
Okay, this is in?
Chapter 20.
Verse
7 and 8.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Look, in chapter 20, and just like I said in chapter 19, what follows from 19, really starting in 17, 18 of Leviticus, are all of the instructions. Do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. And then he reminds you, and by doing that, by making those differences, you're setting yourself apart, okay? So in chapter 20, he's talking about not offering your children to Molech in verse 1. He's talking about going whoring after others. So this is a lot about idolatry. And he says in verse 7, you shall set yourself apart and be set apart and guard my commands and my laws, etc., who set you apart. All right, so this is still talking about the same thing.
Yeah, so if we set ourselves apart, then Yahweh will set us apart?
Well, he's already set us apart. In other words, he's chosen us to be different. He says, what makes you set apart is the choices you're going to make, and I'm going to give you what you need to do that. So I am setting you apart. I'm giving you the things but that doesn't mean that the world is going to see you as set apart if you don't choose to embrace what I'm doing. So by popping your bubble, you've now been set apart from everybody else because you see things in ways they don't. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that sets you apart potentially. So I've given you the potential to be set apart. And I'm the one that's going to give you all the information of what it looks like to be set apart. Now you've got to decide whether or not you're going to do that, whether you're going to be that. Okay?
And I want to say also that, so you went over the first mention of set apart and the noun set apartness, but the verb being set apart is first in Genesis 1, to verse 3, where it says Yahweh set apart the Shabbat.
Yes.
And there in the Vishamru, the set apart, when you set apart the Sabbath, and it says Yahweh sets you apart with the Sabbath. So yeah, it's a Shabbat.
Yes, we're going to get quite a little bit about the Shabbat eventually, as far as set apart. Because we're going to talk about set apart gatherings and set apart days and set apart time. Okay, so that's going to get covered in there. All right, thank you, Chris. All right, Shannon?
This is just a comment. Something that this is what I gleaned from this teaching. How Yahweh says that He's set apart. He's different, not like any other Elohim. And I understand I'm supposed to be the same, not be like anybody else. And what it just reminded me of to not be afraid to stand out or step out, even if it's really out of your comfort zone. It hits me because I had that personality where I'm so used to just being reserved, being to myself and quiet. And sometimes when people ask me, why do you wear your Torah t-shirt, and I kind of get hesitant to answer. It's like I don't want to really say it in words. It's not like I'm not ashamed of my Torah t-shirt. It's just I don't have the heart really but I still do it because they were asking, and I didn't want to come off as rude. But I've noticed that with myself, and also noticing like the things that I want to do in my life, my goals. It does involve me stepping out and not being quiet, but it's just what it reminded me of, and it's an inspiration to me of seeing Yahweh, how He's set apart, and He doesn't care what people think about Him. I mean, He is Yahweh. He is who He is, and He's just there and not a maggot.
Our opinion isn't going to change Him at all.
Exactly. So that's what.
And He's not going to change because of our opinion. And that's part of the problem we have, is that we change because of other people's opinion, and their opinions affect us. That shouldn't be if you're set apart. His opinion should change you, nobody else's. All right?
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, appreciate that. All right, Miss Jennifer.
So this might be a little bit more of a mechanical question, but in Deuteronomy 14:21, when it talks about, you're not to eat anything that dies of itself, but you may give it to the outsider within your gates, or you can sell it to a foreigner. So I'm a little bit curious about, with being set apart, my understanding reading this is that we're set apart, but we're not necessarily to have expectations for those other people that are not. Am I kind of reading that right from that? Because to me, this, like, for instance, with unleavened bread, when you're getting rid of all the stuff in your house, does that mean you can give it to people that are not?
Absolutely.
Torah keepers?
It just got to be out of your house. So you can do all that. What we don't want to do is the hypocritical thing that the Jewish community does, where they'll do a little contract that sells it to the rabbi or whatever, and so that they don't own it anymore, so it's not their house or their stuff or whatever, and then they buy it back, and then, look, just get rid of it. Now, you can get rid of it to give it, look, best thing to do with the unleavened bread situation, all that leaven, put it out on your counter 3 or 4 weeks before we get there, and just eat that stuff before, That's what my wife does. I think it's brilliant, and it works great, Rebbitzin puts all the stuff we see, you got to eat this stuff in the next 3 weeks. Okay, all these crackers, all of this, whatever it is, this stuff's got to go. And especially if you do that, you won't accidentally go out and buy more of it because you already got it out there knowing that it has to go, All right, good questions. All right, live stream.
Okay, from MSK, it says, question, Exodus 19:6 is to be fulfilled at the Millennium, right? Because if there's no other nations around, you'll have nothing to be set apart from.
Yes, well, when you finally get to the kingdom, not the millennium, in the millennium, all right, there will be other nations doing other things. It's because if there is no other nations around, you'll have nothing to be set apart from. So it's going to be fulfilled at the millennium. Look, the nation was supposed to do it here, And yes, we will be doing that in the millennium. I guess that's what he's trying to say, okay? So in between, we're not a nation anymore. When they were a nation, they were supposed to fulfill this and do this. They didn't. So yes, we'll see this now happening again in the millennium. Because once we get to the kingdom time, there won't be any other nation but Israel, okay? But that's after the millennium.
From Lacey Harris, says, I work in the medical field and have a strong aversion to the mask mandates from all kinds of different levels. Is this my defiance, or should I continue to stand and this be one of my examples of being set apart?
All right, so, look, it's got to be something that's open and obviously different, but they connect it correctly. Okay, your decision not to wear a mask is not going to connect you to anything necessarily. It can connect you to all kinds of different, perceptions of people. When I tell people I don't eat pork, that connects me to a very small potential group of people that don't eat pork, okay? If I tell people that I keep Shabbat, it again puts me in a very small potential group of people. Not wearing a mask could be any wide variety of people that say, I don't want to wear a mask, for lots of different reasons. So it doesn't necessarily do anything with the set apart thing. Now, should you make the stand? That's up to you. I mean, everybody chooses where they make their stands, but this is not a Torah issue, okay? Do I think it's a health issue? Yes, I think actually it's bad for you as opposed to helping you, because now you're rebreathing whatever it is you have, if you have something, and you're limiting your oxygen, which is terrible for your brain and everything. So I would say there's lots of reasons to do certain things, but it's not about this idea of being set apart, okay?
Pete and Brenda Lamb, so was the first thing set apart by Yahweh, sun and moon, for appointed times in Genesis 1:14, and also the first day of Pesach in Exodus 12:16.
Was the time the first thing set apart by Yahweh? I suppose that we could look at the very first thing is that when he starts with the turning the tohu and bohu into what it became, he was setting the whole planet apart, because the whole planet was intended to serve this way. And then, of course, the garden was intended to be set apart to serve Yahweh. So, I mean, we can look at all these things going back. And I appreciate Chris pointing out, that the first place that the root of the verb is used is in setting of the Sabbath apart, which clearly it is different and serves the purposes of focus on the worship of Yahweh. And so, I mean, we could look at all of these things as long as they connect back, and these certainly do. And the appointed times are going to be something we definitely will talk about as far as set apart gatherings and set apart times. All right, so hopefully that answers that. Well, be patient, we'll get to that. All right, next.
From Greg Wallen, says, Rabbi, what would be the highest level or core way of being OODD? Open, obvious, discernibly different. Is it the aspects of the fruit? Where does the thought come in? And what's the heart of the matter?
Okay, so what would be the highest level? The thing is this, you're asking two sort of things at the same time. One is, what's the highest level of actually being set apart? And what is the level of being open and obvious and discernibly different? The highest level, or the core way of being open and obvious, is that you are doing it consistently. That you actually are being different. You're not just Torah observant, you're being Torah observant. You're being a Sabbath keeper as opposed to just keeping the Sabbath, but you're being that. So that the people around you are not even going to question whether or not you're going to do something on Shabbat other than, keeping it. See, I have family members, and look, you might say, yeah, but your family's Jewish, but they don't keep anything, okay? And so my family used to invite me to do lots of things on Shabbat all the time, because they do anything and everything on Shabbat. But after a while, when they realized the consistency of my response, like, no, I'm not going to do that, that is now the openly discernible, obviously discernible difference that they've now received and don't even think to ask, because they already know. So it's the consistent application of that being set apart, of your being different, that becomes more open and obvious, okay? So when certain things happen and you react with the fruit of the Spirit, it's the same thing. If you react with the fruit in areas that other people wouldn't, then you are showing, consistently of course this is, then you are showing that. If you do it once or twice here and there, that's just going to be one of those random things that sometimes you act this way, sometimes you act that way. So at the core of it is the consistency of the application of the walk. All right, now where does it come from? The thought come in, or where does the heart come in? Well, it's always going to be that you have the thought, an emotion can attach itself, how you respond to that thought, and then what you do next is going to be either set apart or not. And so that's where we're supposed to take the thought into captivity to first examine it, whether or not it should have an emotional response. Because the action is going to come out of the emotion. I want to do this, I don't want to do this. That's going to be an emotion. It's going to be, do I feel like doing it or not feel like doing it? A thought is just information. So you got to first analyze the thought and say, is this information that should be connected to a feeling and an action? And it has to do with how set apart you're trying to be. In other words, then you ask, is this something Yeshua would do? What does this do to Yahweh's name and reputation? What does it do to my setting that example and setting apart his name? And so it's always going to start with the thought and then the heart. Okay, next.
Donna Stevens says Isaiah 41:14, 1:4, 30:11. When I'm by myself, I'm very observant, but sometimes around others, I go backwards and swerve off the path, and it's my mouth doing it. How do I get it in my head to, quote unquote, stop it?
All right, so you already have step one. Okay, you've made the observation of what the problem is. So the problem is not the being by yourself or people. The problem is that when you're not around people, there isn't anybody testing you, which is why I told you that this is part of the reason why we are, in my little mini sermon before the teaching, I talked about with our teenagers doing this or that, or other people doing this and that we need to have those things around in our lives, not that we want it, because it helps to test us, so that we can grow in our decision-making capacity, our discernment, and then the decisions we make based on that discernment. So what your first thing is that you have to recognize is that when you're with other people, there can be this tendency to go backwards or swerve. And it's usually what comes out of your mouth. Okay, well, fine. This is where you might want counsel, where you can discuss more specifically, because I'm sure it's not every interaction on every different type of subject. It's certain things that are triggering a response. So you might want to ask yourself, with or without the counsel, what is common? In other words, what do these situations have in common when you have this backward swerving thing? Because it's not maybe every time you're with people, but it just happens with people when it doesn't happen when you're by yourself, because it's something about the people and your interaction with them that at times triggers this backward swerving off the path problem. And if you can figure out the commonalities, like whenever somebody does this or says this or this is going on is when I tend to have this problem, then you can start to come up with workarounds so that you can catch it sooner and not swerve or go backwards. So we're going to need to be a lot more specific about not just saying, well, hey, when I'm around people is when I have a problem. So, well, you can't avoid people. Not forever. I mean, you have to interact with them in some way. And the forever kingdom is going to be filled with, guess what? People. So you're going to have to figure out what it is that is happening in those moments when you're with people when this is happening. It's not happening every time you're with people. Only certain people, certain times, certain situations, and certain issues. All right. Next.
From Chris Adelina Newman, in the parable of the prodigal son, would you say that the prodigal son, when he ran away from the father, was he not set apart yet?
In the parable of the prodigal son, would you say the prodigal son, when he ran away, was not set apart? Okay, maybe I need to explain this a little differently. You have been called to be set apart. The prodigal was called to be set apart. You're only set apart when you're being set apart, which means that could change moment to moment, day to day, month to month. Over time, though, you want to consistently develop the state of being that is set apart. And that child, the prodigal, was not at that point set apart in his state of being. But when you say, was he not set apart yet? Set apart, again, I think we're thinking almost in that Christianized idea of something as a finished product, like being saved. Set apart is not a status that you achieve and then you stay there. Set apart is something you do every moment of every day. Okay, it's a state of being, not a status. Okay? So don't think of it as, at some point, I'm now set apart. No. Moment by moment, you may be acting in a set apart way, behaving in a set apart way, consistent with him. And when he says, be set apart, be as I am in my being. And then you have those moments where you've swerved and gone backwards, as the other person said. And then guess what? Those moments you are not being set apart. And so stop thinking about things in terms of reaching an end and I've achieved it and now I don't have to think about it anymore. No, you will think about this forever. Okay? Forever. It's like a man and a woman. A man has to think about being a man, always. He doesn't just have to think, I'm a man, so I'm a man. No, you have to be one. A woman has to think about being a woman. You have to be one. You can't just say, well, I'm a woman, so I'm a woman. No, but you have to act like what he intended as a woman, acted like he intended as a man. You can't just say, well, that's what I am, and so that's what I am. No, you have to be that. There are things that are behaviors that men do, that women do. So just like there are behaviors that if you're a set-apart man, you do, or a set-apart woman, you do. And you have to think about them to do them. Now, if you do them enough, they become more autopilot because you now have the habit to do them. But guess what? If you are complacent, you will go and swerve and go backwards. So you have to not get complacent. You have to be aware, at least at all times, on some level, of what it means that at every moment you are. That's part of why you put the seat on. All right, so you're wearing the seat. Okay, see which camera I want. Okay, I'll put them over here, right? So you have the seat on to remind you. Now, I don't think about my seat all day. I think about them every day when I put them on. I think about them several times during the day if something comes up that reminds me that I might need to think about them. But at least every day I put them on as a reminder that I have to be thinking this way every day. I don't just put them on and think, okay, they're on because I'm supposed to wear them. No, they are. You should think about this every day when you put them on and just say, when you put them on, yourself, say, hey, this is to remind me to be Torah observant all day, to be set apart. Because you know what? Regular people don't wear seat. Set apart people wear seat. Okay? Because it sets you apart. It makes you different. It's discernible and distinguishable. Now, there is a little confusion because you've got lots of people wearing them who it doesn't represent what it should because they're doing all kinds of things they shouldn't while wearing them. So it doesn't have the purity that it was intended in Numbers 15. Where they were worn by set-apart people doing set-apart things to remind them to do set-apart things. So now, lots of people are wearing them. And so it's been diluted in what it represents. Okay, next.
Are you just talking about the zeets? I was over at an outdoor shopping area, and a Orthodox lady and her kids came by, and they saw my zeets, and she was just beyond joyed to see another man wearing zeets because, you know, even though I told her I was Messianic and she was Orthodox, but she was just so happy to see that.
Oh, yeah. I had a lady in the shopping center one time, and I was in Publix or something, and saw the seat. Now, she was Orthodox, but she saw me with the seat on, and she was just like, you know, in Tennessee, she's not seeing that so much. Not like when she was back in New York, where she saw it all the time in the community she was in with the Jewish community, but just the idea. Actually, here's the funny thing. It was somebody else that got seen, and they called me because I was near enough by to come to meet this lady, you know, and she was still excited to meet a rabbi, even if I was Messianic, and, you know, didn't quite understand all that at first, but she was still okay afterwards. But just the idea of the tzitzit being something that got somebody's attention. Okay? And by the way, this is just something that triggered that. It had to do with what I said earlier in the pre-teaching. So some of you watching this teaching now with the Afterburn are not going to know what I'm talking about. But, you know, part of being set apart and being a set-apart people and having a responsibility as watchmen over all of that is that, I get people that tell me all the time that people are posting things in our group or posting things somewhere that are attacking in some way, whatever it is. You know what? How about you taking it upon yourself to, in a right way, stand up? In other words, and let the person then say, look, you know what? That was probably not appropriate for you to post in our group. Because we can control posts, we can't control comments to posts unless we turn them off. So often the problematic stuff is people responding to a post. And so that's, somebody recently was in there attacking me for something. And so you guys, so you'll all contact me. So why are you contacting me? How about you standing up and saying, hey, and not attack them back, but just say, hey, listen, if you have an issue, have you talked to Rabbi? Did you go to that prayer? I mean, how about you encouraging them to do what's right instead of being all upset that the post is there? Okay? Because a lot of people are doing a lot of things, and you guys get all upset about it, and I'm not hearing hardly any of you stand up and say, hey, what you just did is wrong. There's a right way to do this. How about doing that? Or even asking the question, did you go to your brother first? No? Then why are you posting this in public? Because that's Lashon Hara. That's wrong. So where are you guys standing up to that? And I don't mean attacking it. I mean appealing to them to do the right thing and pointing out that you don't think what they did is correct. This is not the right way to go about this. And allow that conversation to go. And I would leave the post then and let you guys have that conversation. I mean, I'm almost at a point where I'm ready to kill the group. Just because I don't see it bearing the right fruit, and except that people go in there and say dumb things and nobody seems to stand up to it, except to contact me to ask me to take the post down. I was like, how about just responding to the post? Oh, but they want me to do it. No, because then I start a fight because they're attacking me. You guys can stand up and say, hey, did you do the right thing with this? How did you address this with the leadership? Because I can promise you 99.999999 whatever percent of the time, nobody's addressing anything with the leadership. This is not happening. Ask Elder Billy, ask Rabbi Tom, ask me. Nobody's really doing this that way. But you guys can have a role to play by saying, hey, I'm sorry you had this terrible experience or whatever it was, but did you talk to anybody? What happened? And don't ask for the details that we post in the post. Like, is this actually something that should be done in public? And saying, this should be maybe handled privately? Why disturb everybody's peace if you don't have to? And I'm not saying that disturbing the peace means that it might derail somebody. Remember, we talked about that already before the teaching. But do you need to disturb people's peace for no reason? Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, Rob, we got time maybe for one more.
This is the last one. Rick Johnson, our ambassadors, witnesses, representatives, synonymous with set apart, and are both branches, Israel and Judah, set apart.
Okay, wait, one more time because it didn't come up on my screen. Just want to make sure that I heard that.
It says, our ambassadors, witnesses, representatives, synonymous with set apart, and are both branches, Israel and Judah, set apart.
Okay, I think I know what you're trying to get at. Look, we as representatives, I called it ambassadors or whatever you wanted to call us, have a responsibility to be set apart. That doesn't make us set apart. He desires that the people that he's chosen to be his people would be set apart, especially if you're claiming to be, as you read in Deuteronomy. You today have, caused Yahweh to declare you to be his people. Well, if we're going to be his people and we're going to claim him to be our Elohim, which is what it talks about in that chapter, I think it's Deuteronomy 26, then, we should then be set apart. Now, when they ask about Judah and Ephraim, I think that was right? Was it Judah and Ephraim that you asked about?
Yeah, he said Israel and Judah.
Oh, Israel and Judah, same thing. All right. Again, the same answer, okay? yes, the two houses are supposed to be set apart. Both Judah and Israel were supposed to be set apart. When they were one nation, they were supposed to be set apart. When they were two nations, they were supposed to be set apart. Even though they actually had splits, you had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, but they were still supposed to be representing Yahweh as set apart people. Remember, the definition was to be consecrated, declared sacred, dedicated, or set apart for the service or worship of Yahweh. To be separate for a special purpose. Yes, Judah and Israel had special purposes, and they were to be distinguishable as different and openly, discernibly as different. And so that was what they were supposed to be. And so let's not, again, go back to that labeling and status as if somehow one set apart is always set apart. Yes, always they were supposed to be. That was the covenant, the intention. But doesn't make them set apart. Set apart is a behavioral choice. We act and be, our state of being is different. So our choices are what are discernible as different. All right, what makes you different? The choices. Right? Go back to the teaching, making decisions, the reason you exist. You're here so that he can watch you make choices. That is the reason that you are here. And those should be set apart category of choices. Right? You should be doing choices that show that you are set apart. And that's what should make all the difference. Amen? Amen. All right.